please be respectful in all comments and questions in the discussion. I'd like to present Holly Graham she's the Outreach and Education Coordinator, Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, Coastal Fisheries Division. I welcome her and look forward to her presentation on Texas seagrass. Take it, Holly, please.
Awesome. So my video should be up now and working. Thank you for the introduction, you guys, and I appreciate everyone joining us here this afternoon. So like we mentioned already, we are going to be spending some time talking about seagrasses here in Texas. The presentation is going to be split up into two parts. The first 15 minutes or so are going to be just a formal presentation, and then I have a little bit of a demo at the end where we're going to I'm going to walk you through actually pressing some seagrasses. So if we were in person, you guys would actually get to do this with me, but instead I'm going to show you so that you can hopefully do this in the future. So let's go ahead and get started. So seagrass, although it is called a seagrass, it's not a grass at all. It's actually a marine flowering plant. One thing I did forget to mention, we're going to do questions at the end. I just want to make sure I have time to get through. Go ahead and put your questions into the chat as we go through so you don't forget one, and then I'll answer them at the end. But anyway, back to seagrass. So like I mentioned, it's a marine flowering plant. So this means that it has flowers and leaves that are completely submerged underwater for 100% of its life. It never has those flowers or leaves come up above the surface like you might think of with like a lily in freshwater, where the leaves and the flowers float on the surface there. Their leaves and flowers are completely submerged underwater for their entire life. And there are several different parts here to the seagrasses. And I should be able to use a spotlight. You know what, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to start at the bottom of the plant and then kind of work my way up. And I'll go in the same order that's written on the side of this slide here as well. But there's several different parts to seagrasses. We have the roots and the rhizome. So seagrass is anchored into the bottom of the bays and in the bottom of the estuaries with those roots and rhizomes. The roots are there to help the plants take up nutrients and to transport oxygen into the sediment. The rhizome is there for starch storage, and again to help transport oxygen and keeping that plant in place. And then if we go up a little bit, we have our sheath, which is there to protect the leaves as they're growing. And seagrasses, they are photosynthetic, so those leaves are really important for the plant as it goes through photosynthesis to get its energy. And then, like I mentioned, they also have flowers, and that's one of the ways that they can reproduce. Instead of using, like land plants sometimes use the wind to transfer pollen from plant to plant, seagrass will use the current and the water to move the pollen around from the different plants. And they will reproduce again by that seed, but they can also just kind of spread those rhizomes out and the roots out and grow new plants out that way as well. So similarly to a lot of our terrestrial plants, seagrasses have a lot of the same needs. Sunlight, because remember they're photosynthetic, so they need that light in order to grow. And this is going to be a really key feature here. So because they grow underwater, that sunlight needs to get through the water column before it can get to the plant. So because of that, they tend to grow in shallower water where that light can actually get through the water column, right? And that's going to be really, really important later. And I'll mention it a few times probably throughout this whole thing. They also need some sort of soft substrate so that they can grow and move those roots and move those rhizomes out throughout the bottom of the bays and bottom of the estuaries here. They need nutrients just like our land plants do as well. And because they do grow in our bays and in our estuaries, we need some kind of salinity or some kind of saltiness in the water. And it varies from species to species. So some species that we have here can tolerate fresher water, some need a little bit saltier water. So the range for all of the plant species that we have here in Texas is anywhere between 20 and 50 parts per thousand. And just for comparison's sake, the average salinity out in the Gulf of Mexico is about 35 parts per thousand. So again, we have some plants that can tolerate less than average, some that can tolerate a little bit more than average. And there's a number of reasons why we're here talking about it today. They're all listed on the screen. So I am in Corpus Christi right now. So it's really important for those of us who live along the coast because it helps to reduce coastal erosion. And it does this in two ways, which I think is kind of interesting. Remember, it has that really extensive roots and rhizome structure that holds it in place in the bottom of the bay. And what it's doing there is it's really just stabilizing that sediment a little bit. And it's preventing the sediment from shifting around too much. So it's kind of more structured, and we're not going to see a lot of coastal erosion because of that root structure. But also the leaves can help to dampen the wave energy as the waves are hitting the shoreline. So in an area where there's no seagrass present at all, we have a wave that has energy associated with it as it's moving through the bay into the shoreline. When there's no seagrass, 100% of that wave energy is hitting the shoreline and then causing some erosion to happen along the shoreline. However, in areas where we have seagrass present, some of that wave's energy is going to be transferred to the leaves of the seagrass in the water. So it's a lot less powerful as it hits the shoreline. And so the leaves also help to prevent coastal erosion. It's a really great source of food for a bunch of critters that live in our coastal areas. You'll notice that as we go through the different species that we have here, 3 of the 5 are actually named after animals that will eat the seagrass. It helps to improve water quality. Seagrass can take toxins out of the water. And also that the root structure helps to, again, keep a lot of those sediments in place. So it helps to keep the water nice and clear. And because they're photosynthetic, they're putting a lot of oxygen into the water, which is incredibly important for all the critters that live, for all of our aquatic critters. And of course, it provides a really great habitat for a lot of different fish species that are there. Seagrass meadows are incredibly productive habitats. We have a ton of juvenile fish, shrimp, crabs that really utilize and need these habitats in order to hide from predators. And because they are such a great spot for all these juvenile or young fish and other animals to hide from predators, it's a really great spot for the larger fish to go hunting for food. And, at the surface of the water, we also see a lot of wading birds, a lot of herons and egrets hunting for fish in these areas as well. So the picture that's on the screen right now is a picture of some seagrass, and it's really small. On the next slide, I'm going to blow it up a little bit. So what I want you guys to do is I want you guys in the A feature just to answer a question for me. So again, I'm going to blow the picture up a little bit larger on the next slide. And I want you guys to try to count the number of fish that you see in this picture. So once you think that you found all of them, go ahead and put your answers into the Q&A. And I've seen several answers here. It took me a while to figure this out as well. So I'm seeing some answers coming in, 2, 3, 1, 5, 12, 10. So I'm seeing a big range, and that's the whole reason why I wanted to show you guys this picture. Like, it's not a great picture, but I think it really gets the point across. I see 5 fish in this, and for the longest time, I only saw 4, and it took me a little bit to find all 5 of them, but I had some students that had a little bit of a better eye than I did. And again, the whole point of me showing this to you to show you that, like, it is a really great habitat, and it's really easy for a lot of these little guys to find a spot to hide out and try to survive. All right, cool. So seagrass is not the only aquatic vegetation that we have here along the coast. We also have some algae present as well, and there's differences between both of these types of aquatic vegetation, and they're listed on the screen. I really am not going to talk about many of these. I just want them to be here for you guys to see, but I do want to point out the root structure. I think that visually, when you're trying to identify if something is a seagrass or an algae, being able to look for that root structure is going to be the easiest way to tell if it's seagrass or if it's algae. So remember, seagrass has that really extensive root structure with the rhizomes, and it's keeping it anchored onto the bottom of the bay, where on the other hand, we have algae, which doesn't have that same root structure. And you'll see that the species that I have here in this picture is a type of sargassum, and you'll see the little kind of round dots all over it. Those are its air bladders that help it stay floating in the water. And the reason why we see so much of this sargassum washing up on the beach is because it's not anchored to anything. It just kind of floats where the current takes it. And that's why we see so much of it washed up on the beach, whereas seagrass, again, is anchored onto the bottom of the bay. Now, if you are just going out and doing a beach walk and trying to identify if something is seagrass or something's algae, I do want you guys to keep in mind that seagrass, although it does have that root structure, it loses its leaves just like terrestrial plants can. So you may find just a leaf of some seagrass present without the root structure there. And the other thing is that algae will sometimes have what's called a holdfast, which will, it does essentially what the name says. It just holds that algae in place, and it allows it to be in like a prime area to continue to get sunlight and nutrients and everything it needs to grow, rather than just drifting throughout the current. So examples of this would be things like algae species that are growing on rocks, growing on shells, growing on posts and pilings that are in the water. They're not taking up any nutrients from those things. They're just being held in place with that holdfast, whereas the roots from the seagrass are actually helping the plant to take up nutrients. And then here in Texas, we actually have 5 species of seagrass. They're all listed here with their common and scientific name. I'm going to be referencing them just by their common names here today, but if you're interested in the scientific name, it's there as well. I'm going to talk about 3 of them on their own, and then the last 2 I'm going to talk about together because they are the most similar and the most difficult to tell apart. So the first species that I want to talk about is manatee grass. This one's one of my favorites. It's really unique in comparison to the other species that we're going to talk about here today because it has a cylindrical leaf. So if you were to take that leaf and roll it between your fingers, it would actually feel like a spaghetti noodle. So if you are unsure about whether or not, like what species a leaf might be that you found along the beach or along the bay, my first thing that I always do is I always take it and try to roll it around. And if it rolls, it's going to be our manatee grass. If it doesn't and it has a flat leaf, then it's going to be one of the other ones. And this one it can get pretty tall in comparison to some of the other species that we have here. And it's very common in all of the bays that we have here in Texas, especially the ones further south. The next species is turtle grass. This one is also fairly easy to identify because in comparison to a lot of the other species, it has a really, really wide leaf. And that rhizome that it has is also like very, very thick. And it's pretty fragile and can break pretty easily. Turtle grass is probably one of the least common species that we have here in Texas, although it is the most common in Redfish Bay State Scientific Area, which is near like Rockport, Port Aransas, Aransas Pass, that area. Why that is, I'm not entirely sure, but in that area specifically, we see mostly turtle grass. The next species is another one of my favorites just because it's kind of unique, and it's called stargrass or clovergrass because it looks like a clover. And this one, although it's not uncommon, it's one of the harder ones to find just because in comparison to all the other species, like it's very short and very bushy. So it's only a few centimeters tall, and the leaves also are very, very small. So it's there and it's present in the bays. However, because it's so short, it just kind of gets overshadowed by the leaves of the other seagrasses. Because remember, these aren't growing separately in their own meadows. We aren't seeing meadows of turtle grass and meadows of stargrass. We're seeing all of these 5 species growing in big meadows together most of the time. And sometimes different species predominate, but for the most part, we're seeing them all growing together. And the last 2 that I want to talk about are shoalgrass and widgeon grass. These 2 look the most similar because the leaves of both of them are very flat and narrow. However, there are a few differences. So shoalgrass has flat leaf tips, whereas widgeon grass have pointed leaf tips. And you can also take a look at that rhizome where the roots are meeting the rhizome. That's where the node is. And that node on shoalgrass is going to have multiple roots, whereas on widgeon grass it's just going to have a single root. And that's like easy enough, I guess, to tell them apart. But visually, like if you're not digging up the seagrass and looking at the roots, and maybe it's really hard because, again, these leaves are pretty small. So maybe you don't have a microscope or something to look at these leaf tips. The easiest way to visually identify them is shoalgrass. You can see the difference here. It just kind of grows up from the rhizome in almost single leaves, whereas if we take a look at the widgeon grass, you can see that as it matures, it starts branching, and there's multiple leaves coming off at different sections here of that one plant. It also gets to be a lot taller than shoalgrass, but again, you'd have to make sure that you're looking at an older leaf, a more mature leaf, because as you can see, some of the younger ones are look very, very similar to shoalgrass. And of course, there are some threats to seagrass. There's things that happen naturally: storms, bioturbation, sedimentation, algal blooms. These all just happen sometimes. And the reason why all of these are like potentially will have a negative impact on our seagrasses is just because they're blocking out that light that can get down to the plant, right? So if we have a storm that kicks up a lot of sediment, it's going to be so murky, and it's going to be hard for these plants to go through photosynthesis. And that's going to be the same for all of the other causes that are listed on that natural side. And of course, there's human impacts as well. Dredging is a pretty obvious impact, I think, where we're going in and actually digging up parts of the seagrass meadow. But there can be like secondary effects to dredging as well, where if they're dredging in an area, kicking up a lot of that sediment, and then they're causing a lot of that bioturbation, or they're causing a lot of like sediment to get kicked up in the water that prevents sunlight from getting through the water, that can have an impact on seagrass as well. Excess nutrients getting into the bay can cause algal blooms, which again can block sunlight. Coastal development is another big one. So, you know, even if we're talking about like a pier that's going in and we're only digging up maybe small sections of seagrass to put in the posts that are going to hold the pier, we still now have a pier over the seagrass meadow. And as the sun moves throughout the day, we have an area now in that seagrass meadow that's going to be blocked by the shadow of the pier. So that's something else that we have to. And then the rest of what I want to talk about here today is going to be impacts from boating. So remember earlier I said that they're photosynthetic plants, and because of that, they tend to grow in shallow water. And they're also a really great and productive habitat. So we see a lot of juvenile fish, a lot of adult fish there, which means that we also see a lot of anglers in these areas because they are going and searching for and trying to catch these larger fish. So we end up a lot of times with boaters in shallow areas, and that can oftentimes lead to propeller scars, or prop scars as we call them. And you can see the image here. This is from Redfish Bay State Scientific Area again. This is going through some turtle grass, and you can see several different scars in just this one image. And again, this is caused by boaters who are in very shallow water, maybe too shallow water for their boat, and their motor is just, the propeller from their motor is just ripping up the seagrass there. And the reason why this is important is because it's causing habitat fragmentation. And we have these areas that don't have the seagrass in them, in the scarred areas. When we get a big storm or get a lot of wave action, all of that sediment that's in those scars is going to be a lot easier, like thrown up into the water column. And we can create these deep trenches that makes it a lot harder for the seagrass roots and rhizomes to kind of heal themselves back together. And of course, they're just like a really prolific habitat, right? And really productive. So we want to try to protect these for a lot of our anglers who like to go out and go fishing. So because of how important they are, and the fact that they grow in these shallow waters and are very susceptible to getting these scars, back in 2013, there was statewide legislation passed, pretty much just saying that it's illegal to uproot seagrass with a boat motor. And there are a few exceptions, like if you are anchored and you pull up some seagrass on your motor or on your anchor, that's fine. Using a trolling motor is also fine, because they typically aren't going at as fast of a speed as an outboard motor, and they won't cause as much damage. And then also if you're trying to get up on plane, because hopefully if you're just getting up on plane, it should be like a long, hundreds of foot long a stretch that you're uprooting, and hopefully it'll just be quick enough to pop up on plane and shouldn't have too much of an impact. So those are like ways to around the legislation, I guess. But if you're just kind of plowing through an area, that's where it gets to be a really big issue. And that does happen quite a bit. So in order to let folks know that it's illegal to uproot seagrass and why they should care about, you know, protecting this habitat, there are billboards up along the coast, and there's an example of that down at the bottom there. And these white signs are posted at pretty much every boat ramp that has access to the coast in the state. Just again, as a reminder for anglers as they're getting out to lift their motor, drift if they can, use a push-pull to get out of these shallow areas, or use a trolling motor to help protect this habitat. Because again, it's really important for our anglers as well that these areas are protected, because they're using them to fish, and the fish need this habitat, right? So those signs are up at pretty much every boat ramp along the coast now. And what I want to do is I want to do a brief demonstration showing y'all how to press seagrasses. Again, if we were actually in person, I would have you guys do this with me. So I hope you'll get as much out of it just by me visually showing y'all as you would doing it with me. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Oop. Wrong button. All right. So before I switch the camera over, I'm going to get a different angle so that you can see what I'm working on. But before I do that, I have a few things that I want to show you. And I guess the first thing is going to be the reason why we started pressing seagrass here was so that we can create these binders to hand out to law enforcement, especially after the regulation was passed, so that they would have information about what seagrass is, why it's important, what it looks like, because, you know, a lot of times they may not have the same knowledge about, you know, specific vegetation types and whether it's seagrass or algae or what they should be looking out for. So we created these binders to help them with that. And they go through some information about what seagrass is, where it is. So there's some maps in here as well. But we also wanted to include the different species that we have here in Texas, and with some information about them, along with like a pressed sample. So we create these presses for our education events, for game wardens to have, for other educators to have if they would like one. So if you guys are located along the coast, or if you take trips to the coast and you want to collect some seagrass to create something like this of your own, that's hopefully you're going to use the skills that I am going to show you here today. As a part of the additional materials that I had up for this session, you should have like written instructions for how to do this as well. If not, I can email them to you. That shouldn't be a problem. And there should be instructions on how to make a plant press if you don't have one. And my plant press is behind me. You can kind of see it. It's really big. So this is a press that was made actually by one of our technicians here when he was a student. Really all you need are two sheets or two pieces of wood or something to hold it together. We've got a strap on this one and then a bunch of cardboard and newspaper. And pressing aquatic vegetation is very similar to pressing terrestrial plants, but there are a few differences. So we'll walk through that really quick. I think that's everything I need to show you before I switch my camera over. So I am going to turn the camera off while I move it. I don't want to make anyone dizzy, and then we will get back into it in just a second. So just give me maybe a minute or two to get set up, and then we'll switch over. All right, so pardon me, I'm gonna have to adjust this just a little bit and move that. Okay, So when we do our seagrass presses here, we use these trays a lot of times to hold our seagrass, and you'll notice that they're in a little bit of water as well. These are just larval trays that we got from BioQuip. You don't need to have something like this. We sometimes find that it helps when we're sorting through and kind of picking through a big clump of seagrass. They do need to be in water to prevent them from drying out. So when we collect our seagrass, we will just put it in a Ziploc bag with a bunch of water in it from the bay. And then after you collect your seagrass, you can keep it in the fridge for like a week or two if you don't have time to get to it right away. And then it starts to turn after a while, so I just keep an eye on it. But when you're out collecting it, which you can legally pull it out with your hands or a shovel. Remember, it's only illegal with uprooting it with a boat motor. So after you've collected it, throw it in a bag, put it into some water, throw it in the fridge until you're ready to work with it. And then once you are, again, you don't have to use this tray or any tray, really. I'm going to go through two different ways that we have done seagrass presses here. And the first way, we really need this tray in the water. So the paper that we use, you can't tell a difference between this paper and any other paper just on the camera, but this is herbarium paper. So it's just really absorbent in comparison to just regular printer paper or cardstock. And you'll see that this one is really kind of gross and it has a bunch of stains and stuff on it. We reuse these. So when we are doing our presses, we will put the plant on it, press it on this herbarium paper. And then when we are ready to put them into like the binders or laminate them, we will peel the seagrass off of this and then put it onto a piece of cardstock. So you'll see that's why it's kind of gross, is because we've used this paper so many times. So the first way that I've seen people that I've done it this way, it's not my favorite way, but the first way that I've seen people press their seagrass is by putting the paper completely underwater and kind of putting the seagrass on top of it and adjusting the leaves a little bit. Now, when you pull this out of the water, the leaves are going to shift, so there's not really a point in getting the leaves perfect and exactly how you want them to look, because they're going to move when you pick the paper up. But you can at least work to get all the leaves on the piece of paper and maybe straighten out the roots a little bit as well. And the tool that I'm using is really just like a dissecting tool. And if I'm doing this with students and having them press their own seagrass, a lot of times I'll just use and have them poke around with the toothpicks. That works just as well. And once you have the plant at least fully on the paper, maybe the leaves don't look exactly how you want them to, but it's at least on the paper, you can take it out of the water. I'm going to try to be careful so the leaves don't move around too much. And then I'm going to move my tray out of the way, and we've got our seagrass on our herbarium paper. Move it down just a little bit. And then you can mess around with this a little bit more too, move the leaves so that they're exactly how you want them to look. We had an artist doing the first round of these. One of our technicians was also an artist, so she spent a lot of time, making sure the leaves looked really nice and looked really natural. So you can do that if you want. I tend to spend a lot of time on trying to make the leaves look really nice. I'm not going to do that today for time purposes, but you can mess around with this as much as you like. So let's say that I'm done here and this is, what I want it to look like. I would then go and put it in the press. So in the press, we would have a layer of cardboard. Then I could put my plant on the herbarium paper on top with some newspaper, and then another sheet of cardboard on top, ready for a new plant to go on this one here. And I could layer as much as I wanted to, as much as my press could hold. So that's the first way that you can press the seagrasses. I used to do that a lot more, but I switched to a little bit of a different type, which is what I'm going to show you now. And again, while you're messing with the seagrass and while you're kind of waiting to work with it, always keep it in water because it does dry out pretty quickly. This is salt water from the bay where I took the seagrass out of earlier, but you can use fresh water as well. It doesn't really matter a ton. So again, the second way, I'm going to move the tray out of the way. So we have another piece of paper here. And I'm just going to put the plant down directly onto the paper without getting the paper wet right away. And then I have like a squeeze bottle. This is just water. You can use a pipette or something else if you want to. This is just what we have here in the lab. And then you can spray the water onto the leaves and move the leaves around that way. And I find this to be a little bit easier, especially with like the widgeon grass with all the different branches. Being able to just spray a little bit of water where I want it helps me to move the leaves helps me to keep the leaves where I want them rather than just having them kind of spray all over the paper. And then you also, because when you take in that first way that I showed you, when you take the paper out of the water, all the leaves shift anyway. So this way just kind of prevents that step from happening anyway. But there's that technique as well. And with that, you can also, when you're done adjusting the leaves, which I'm not going to do again for time, you just put it on your cardboard, put a piece of newspaper on top, and then stick it in the press. And then I do have some algae here as well, and I want to show you all how to press that because it is a little bit different. So we have some algae here. This is easier to just mess around with like your hands and adjust it the way you want it to look. And it's pretty much the same as seagrass. Let's say I'm done with this here. The only thing that's different is that algae tends to stick to the newspaper. So before you put newspaper on, you want to use some kind of like a nylon fabric, which is essentially just what this is. And then you could put your nylon on top, followed by the newspaper, and then your cardboard. And then you could keep stacking it that way. Once your seagrass is in the press, once your press is full, it will take a week or two before it's done, and it depends on the thickness of the seagrass you're pressing. So if it's something like turtle grass, which has that very thick rhizome, like I mentioned before, very thick leaves, it may take 2 to 3 weeks. Something like the algae or shoal grass may only take a week or two. It really depends. And then once it's done, you will end up with something like this, which I have a bunch of our clover grass or stargrass here that's been dried. These have already been kind of peeled off of the paper, but you should be able to pretty easily just kind of scrape it or peel it off of your herbarium paper. And then, so I'm going to take this one here. And then if you were going to laminate like the binder that I showed you, you could just grab a piece of cardstock, or we use cardstock. I guess you could also just use regular computer paper. Just stick your plant there, include a label maybe in the corner with this common and scientific name. And then you could just throw a laminating sheet on it and put it through the laminator and you'd be set. And like I said, these are really helpful to use at educational events or with students or really anything. They're also just very pretty to have around. And I think with that, I've covered everything that I want to. I'm going to move my camera and then we can go back to the screen.
Okay.
Holly,
you ready for questions?
Yes, yeah.
And this is a 15-minute warning till the end of the class.
Oh, already. Okay. So, Holly, the first question that we have is, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry, I'm moving my camera.
That's fine. Somebody asked, how can a person address excessive nutrients naturally? Is there a way with excessive nutrients in the bay? I mean, I know she's coming from with fertilizers and.
Yeah. That's a great question. And I don't think that I have an answer for that. I can definitely look into it and see if I can find something. My email, do you want me to share my screen with my email address on it, or?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay. So again, if there's any questions that I can't answer, go ahead and email them again to me here, and I will talk to someone who will have a few more answers than I do.
Okay, that's great. Okay, the next question asks, is there seagrass in Galveston and Bays?
That's a really great question. So the majority of our seagrasses are found along the lower coast of the state, and that is just because as you move further south, the bays tend to get well, they get saltier, but they also get a lot shallower, which again is just a little bit of a better habitat for our seagrasses to grow, since they need that shallow water and sunlight to survive. So are there seagrasses in Christmas Bay and Galveston Bay? Yes, but there's not as much as there would be where I am here in Corpus Christi, where the Laguna Madre is just incredibly shallow and really great for seagrasses.
Great. All right. And then another person says, I live on Estes Flats. Are you familiar with that area?
I've heard of it before. I'd have to see it on a map to know.
Okay, because I'm not sure where that is either. Can a person report on a person burning through seagrass? And what do you think about airboats and their effects on seagrass?
So if you see something happening, yeah, definitely call the local game warden and report it, please. I definitely encourage that. And as far as airboats, we actually just recently had CCA donate an airboat to us to use for our seagrass work, because they have no impact on seagrasses at all. And they actually help our work a lot, because we can get to a lot of areas that we would not be able to get to monitor with our normal like flat bottom boats. So airboats are great for seagrass. They're more of an issue, I guess, with folks on the water who maybe don't like hearing the noise of them. But for seagrass and for the growth of seagrass, they're great.
Okay, awesome. So this question asks, how can we add seagrass to our shoreline? Is it available to buy?
Great question. No, it's available to buy. And there have been a few studies as far as trying to plant seagrass, and they just aren't very successful for whatever reason. Like transplanting seagrass plants just doesn't seem to work out very well. As far as like adding it to the shoreline, it's just going to have to be something that naturally happens. So an example, I guess, here in Corpus, we have the Laguna Madre here, which again is like a very shallow, hypersaline, very, very salty bay. And because there was really no water exchange anywhere within this lagoon, we really didn't have a ton of seagrass here. But back in the 40s, when the intercoastal waterway was constructed, that allowed a lot more water flow in between the different bay systems here, and especially within the Laguna. And that extra flow and extra circulation allowed seagrass to just start popping up a lot more, which is great for the habitat, right? But we see a lot of anglers in the area a little bit less thrilled to have it, because as the leaves fall off, it kind of just blocks up a lot of the ramps and stuff in the area. But as far as like bringing it to the shoreline or bringing it to your shoreline, you just kind of have to wait for that process to happen naturally.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So I'm going to skip over to this question. This sounds interesting. Would watercolor paper work in place of herbarium paper?
That's a great question. I think it might, because it seems like it would be a pretty absorbent type of paper. You can definitely try it out and see what happens. Doing this way, I've done this without herbarium paper and just using cardstock. The issue is just that it gets like so waterlogged and the paper starts to rip. So as long as I guess the herbarium paper or the watercolor paper is thick enough and won't rip, you should be able to use that.
Right. Okay. All right. This is another interesting question. it has been predicted that the sea level will rise roughly 10 inches by 2050. What does that increased depth mean to the seagrass in our region?
Great question. And that I don't really know. But I think that could mean, because we would end up with more area underwater, correct? So
Right.
we would end up with more area for seagrass to start growing. But as far as what's already out there, it may, I guess, change the range of where it's currently located.
Maybe as long as the sunlight could get through to it, it would still grow.
Yeah,
Correct? So,
yeah, and especially like, again, I work a lot in the Laguna Madre where it's very shallow. It's only about like, I don't know, 4 or 5 feet deep in a lot of places, which is shallow enough. So adding a few additional inches shouldn't impact it too much. It also may just impact the species that grow. So remember our stargrass is really short. It would take the sunlight that has to get through all the way down to the bottom, essentially, of the bay to reach that stargrass. Okay. So maybe we would see other species starting to grow, some that are a little bit taller and their leaves can reach the surface or closer to the surface a little bit easier. That's a great question. I don't know.
Very good.
10 more minutes before the end of the session.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. I'm
going
to skip to this question because I'm a sea turtle. That's one of my passions.
Yeah.
This person asked, we are seeing a lot more green sea turtles in our Galveston area. What seagrass do they prefer, or do they eat all of them?
They eat all of it. So we did have the one that was called turtle grass, but that's not like the only thing that these green sea turtles eat. They're not picky. They're going to eat whatever seagrass, probably even algae, whatever's out there that's a plant for them to eat is what they'll go after.
Okay. All right, good to know. Just keep the balloons out of the water.
Yeah.
That's my passion. All right.
Yes.
All right. The next question is carbon storage in seagrasses significant compared to smooth cord grass or black mangroves?
I don't know about the comparison, but I do know that it stores a ton of carbon, especially when we are looking at it on a global scale. But as far as that comparison, I'm not entirely sure which one stores more or less.
Okay. All right. Very good. I think this last question is just more of a comment. Okay. This is Martin said that more significant than sea level rise is subsidence along the Texas coast, which is 2 times that of melting ice caps and thermal expansion. So the subsidence along the coast is, it's pretty significant.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Awesome. All right. Here's another one. This is interesting. Is there a monitoring program similar to Stream Team for seagrass populations?
We don't have anything like that now. All of the seagrass monitoring is currently being done by just parks and wildlife biologists and other biologists at different universities and local organizations and stuff. I think that the part of the issue with it might just be access and getting people out to different areas of the bays where we might need help with monitoring. And just as a background for anyone who's interested in how we monitor seagrass, what we'll do is we will go out on our boats. Well, first, I guess they take an aerial image of the bay with a drone. They'll get pictures, identify using a computer program where the scarring might be. Then they'll go out on the boats, check to verify whether the computer program was right or not in identifying that scar. And then while we're out there, we will, if there is a scar, we'll measure the length of it, the width of it, the species that are in the area, and kind of go back over time to see if any of that has changed. And just as a heads up, after the regulation passed, we are seeing improvement with the acreage of propeller scarring. It's decreasing, which is great. I don't have any of that data here with me personally, but if you want to see any of it, just let me know and I can get you set up with our seagrass expert here.
Great. And you posted there's your
Yeah.
email address so people can contact you
Yes.
for that. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have time for one more question. This person asked, do seagrasses tolerate transient or no water condition?
They have to be underwater.
Okay.
Was that the question? Did I answer that correctly?
Well, when they say transient, I'm thinking, do they mean like stagnant water? I'm not sure.
Transient.
Michael, do you mean stagnant water or?
Let me see. Where's that question?
Okay, it's Michael Pettit asked it.
And was that Michael? If you're here and you can clarify that for me, go ahead and do that. I'm seeing one of the questions. Do shrimp and other animals benefit from seagrass as well? Yes, of course. It's a great habitat for all of our crabs and shrimp to hide out from predators as well. I have a great view of a blue crab underwater in some seagrass. Not happy to see us, of course, because it's a blue crab, but hiding out in some seagrass, of course.
Sure. Okay, Michael answered, he means blown out tide. Are you familiar with that term?
Yeah, so seagrass won't grow on the flats. So when there's no water in an area, we have those are our mud flats here. So when the tide goes out, we just see a bunch of mud. There's no seagrass growing in those areas. There might be some mangroves and some like cordgrass and stuff, but seagrass has to be underwater all of the time.
Okay. And then Aaron asked, is there a central location for that information? I guess.
Another great question. We do have a seagrass page on the Parks and Wildlife site. The easiest way to find that is probably just going to be by searching TPWD seagrass, and you can actually pull up a seagrass viewer on there as well to get an idea of what seagrasses are present near you.
Okay. Very good. All right. I think you've answered everything, or we've addressed most of them.
Perfect. And my email's up there. Please, if you have any questions, want any information about more pressing stuff or whatever, just let me know. I'd be happy to help out however I can.
Very good.
All right. So I thank you so much for an informative presentation, Holly.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you for answering all the questions. I think we've exhausted that. So I thank you again for the presentation, and this allows the attendees to move on to their next presentation. So with that, again, a big thank you from us.
Thank you guys, and thank you everyone for joining us here today.